Hello and welcome to this video on how to age your alcohol faster. Aging can be an important step in some alcohols. Unfortunately, it can take quite a long time. Anything which streamlines that process could be extremely useful. As with almost anything that reduces the time involved in something complicated like this, and significantly so, will have downsides. This is because the methods we have to streamline the aging of alcohol will inherently either require far more complex equipment, knowledge, or produce some unintended consequences. Despite that, this information is useful and sometimes used in small-scale breweries and distilleries. Think about the benefits of being able to take a product and make a small quantity, then age this in a manner that is quick enough to allow for a small company to profit and continue their business. That sort of idea, even if you're not looking to make a profit, can be used by the home brewer. The lessons can be applied in the same way. A good whiskey can take 10 or more years to age. Wine can take several years, and you have other alcohols that, if stored for at least a short period, like 6 months, will taste that much better. The process, at least insofar as spirits are concerned, follows the same general pattern. It begins by getting the fermentation to occur, then distillation, or in some cases this step can be skipped, such as with wine. The product is then put into storage, often wooden barrels. The contents of the barrel slowly react with both the wood and the content of the barrel. The reaction of charred barrels helps to remove the most reactive compounds, while still allowing flavors and chemical reactions to occur, which gradually even out and get to a point where you have a final, balanced, tasty product. When we talk about something like Tennessee whiskey, for instance, there's between a 2 and 4 year period in which it must sit in a barrel in order to meet the legal requirements for that label. Anything other than that, and it's only classified as something like a bourbon or a whiskey. As said, if you're a small startup looking to try and get your product out there as soon as possible, you're going to try and find ways to cut corners, or at least make it go faster. One of these processes is a sort of sonication. That is, you use sonic waves in a solution to try and impart energy to all the chemicals. This is similar in a manner to heating it up, but doesn't use any heat, thereby keeping proteins and other organic products reasonably consistent. Sonication instead increases the rate of chemical reactions. In fact, at least one methodology provides 20,000 pulses per second. The second benefit to this is that it begins to break up anything that's quite large, and helps to make the barrel material somewhat more porous. This allows the fermentation that you've included in the barrel to migrate into the wood and then out again more freely. This means the effect of storing in a barrel is achieved in much shorter order. If you're not able to use something as high-tech as this, given they can cost thousands and thousands of dollars, you might consider working with much smaller batch volume. Smaller barrels can be a more effective way if you don't have the technology and equipment to use other methods. Small barrels work on the simple principle of surface area to volume ratios. The smaller your volume in total, the greater the surface area to volume ratio is. At 1 litre, you have an approximate surface to volume ratio of 206. At 2 litres, it's 148. At 3 litres, 133. At 5 litres, 114. You can see that the larger the volume gets, the smaller surface area for your total volume that you're using gets. This makes it more difficult for the fermentation or distillate to begin penetrating into the wood and diffusing. As it works its way in, it both gets rid of the most reactive compounds, but also begins to pull out things like vanillin and tannins, essential flavoured. In order to make the most of this knowledge, you're best off using the smallest barrel size relative to the amount you want to be able to make. This will be a different situation for everyone with different cost to benefit propositions. Some people only have a limited space and therefore may prefer to have a larger number of smaller capacity barrels. Some businesses may prefer to have fewer larger barrels that they can produce one particular consistent batch within. Either way, it's worth considering. If you can't work with a large barrel, work with a small barrel, but you'll get results a little bit sooner. Next is another proprietary technique, and this is called Elevage. Elevage uses infrared technology to help mature wine. It's also extremely fast, working in only a few minutes what might take years. The claimed idea behind this is that it has a sticker that helps to concentrate the energies in the room, primarily infrared energy. Although we doubt very much that the product itself is viable, the principle behind it is. Infrared light can be used in particular ways, although it'd be better to use it with white wine than red wine. The infrared ray can help to interfere with things like tannin. Tannin has that bit of flavour, and if you're trying to remove some of those aggressive, harsh notes, it could be a place to start. This occurs because the infrared energy can begin to interfere with some of these molecules and cause them to become distorted, and this disruption can affect their ability to remain in suspension, or in some cases, allow them to bind to others and sink to the bottom as they begin to clot together. This is, in a manner of speaking, similar to the method used when mixing egg whites with your wine. The difference is that there's no egg product involved, and it's not as efficient. To a certain extent, you could get many of the same benefits rather than going through the hassle of incorporating some other device by simply decanting your wine and thoroughly aerating it. Going now from wine to something else that would be stored in a barrel. We're going to look at pressure now. In theory, the normal process of aging can be accelerated by amplifying the pressure. Nominally, aging, as we've mentioned, involves the alcohol slowly diffusing into the wood of the barrel. This is a very slow process. It then migrates out again, and with it carries the flavours that are desired, and it leaves behind some of the undesirable flavours. This can be accelerated by heat, and you can see this with Tennessee whiskey. The change in the seasons are necessary for the barrels to expand and contract, allowing the movement of the contents. As they expand, the wood becomes impregnated by the alcohol. As they contract, it's squeezed out on the inside, and this allows for the movement of the necessary active ingredients, so to speak. That is primarily alcohol, but also any flavoids that are there. You can achieve something similar, but at a somewhat deeper level, with pressure. Pressure can force the alcohol into the wood of a barrel. This is what they do with pressure-treated building timber. As the pressure in the barrel is relieved, the alcohol and other flavors move out and bring with them any flavors that are desired, but they'll also leave behind those that are not. A relatively effective process if you have the means of not only pressurizing the barrels, but doing so safely. Doing it unsafely will likely lead to a number of issues, one of the simplest of which is that you will lose a great deal of what you've made and break many barrels, but you might also create a lot of debris when you break them. The final method we'll mention is somewhat easier. It's a combination of oxygen, heat, and movement. Once you have a barrel, or for that matter, anything you're trying to age, you can combine oxygen by adding it to the gas that's in there. You then seal it up, and you begin applying a small amount of heat, something a little bit above room temperature, but not far, and you ensure that whatever it is you're working with is constantly moving. The combination of heat and oxygen, along with movement, means that all of the chemicals in there are exposed to not only the oxygen, but are encouraged through the heat to have the chemical reactions they're going to have. Oxygen helps this process as it can act as an intermediary. It can also help in simply facilitating some of the chemical reactions, grabbing onto hydrogens from certain compounds and pulling them away to create water. There are also other things oxygen's particularly good at. The heat will also help to encourage any chemical reactions not only between the oxygen and chemicals in your solution, but also the chemicals themselves. This is effectively speeding up what may take years. Movement is important because it ensures that everything that can come in contact will, and that means your chemical reactions can occur. If it's stationary, the area where you combine heat will not be near the same place where the oxygen is, and only those chemicals in that local area will have an increased reaction rate. Movement mitigates that problem. These are just a few ways that you can look at trying to, let's say for lack of a better word, fake age your brewing or what you already have on hand. Some of them are rather straightforward, others are more difficult. Some don't have the same sort of time limitations that traditional methodologies have, but they do require knowledge and/or equipment. If all you're after is a simple and effective way of aging things quicker, simply consider working in smaller size volumes. If you're after something a little more complicated, look at trying to use oxygen, heat and movement, and then pressure. From there, look at some of the other techniques that we've mentioned. They can be useful in some ways, but they're also far more difficult and expensive to implement. Thank you for watching this video. If you have found it interesting, consider liking, sharing and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions or suggestions that you have below.